I cried like a baby when I found out the woman I called Mom had actually bought me with money. My whole life was nothing but a perfectly orchestrated lie. I only discovered the truth when I was digging through my grandmother's old wardrobe the day she died. And even now, I still don't understand. How could they do that to me? I didn't choose where I was born. All I ever wanted was real love, not a family built on deceit. There are moments in life when the line between before and after becomes so stark, like the sharp cut of a scalpel, an indelible mark. I crossed that line on that rainy March morning, the day my grandmother passed away. Perhaps somewhere in the universe, a pendulum had swung. And my fate, my mother's fate, the fate of the woman who gave birth to me, all changed forever. That day, I couldn't stop shaking. Not from grief, but from an anger that ate at my soul like acid. But for you to understand why, I need to tell you, from the beginning, about the man I used to be, before everything shattered. Liam Parker of Savannah. My name is Liam Parker, at least. That's the name I carried for 17 years, until I discovered that every letter in that name was a lie, just like everything else in my life. I grew up in Savannah, Georgia, a place where history lingers on every cobblestone, where ancient oaks draped in Spanish moss form green canopies over the streets, and stately Georgian and Victorian homes stand shoulder to shoulder like old friends. It's a city where time seems to flow slower than the rest of the world, where an afternoon can stretch endlessly in the humid air, sweet with the scent of magnolias. Savannah is a city of squares, 22 small parks arranged like a chessboard, each one a verdant oasis in the heart of the city. It's a place where the sagas of old families are recounted over afternoon tea, where history and the present intertwine in a strange waltz. And it's also a place where family secrets are buried beneath the velvet lining of antique chairs, behind A_sink_mastered paintings, and sometimes, right in the hearts of innocent children. My family lived in a 3-story house on Abercorn Street, amidst rows of old maple trees distinguished by their characteristically dark, gnarled bark. It was a house built in the 1850s, with wide wooden staircases, tall floor-to-ceiling windows, and spacious verandas where one could sit on summer evenings, sipping iced tea and listening to the chorus of cicadas from a distance. It was the kind of house anyone would turn to look at as they passed by, a testament to the Parker family's status and refinement. The Parker family, or at least, the people I had called family for 17 years, consisted of me, my mother Nancy, and my grandmother Dorothy. We weren't the ostentatiously wealthy type with Bentleys parked out front or extravagant European vacations, but we held a stable and respected position in Savannah society. My mother worked at the city library as head of the rare books department, and my grandmother was a widow living off the interest from a family trust fund. My mother, Nancy Parker, was a slender woman with pale blonde hair always tied back neatly, and light blue eyes the color of a Georgia sky on a winter day. She possessed a gentle beauty, not the dazzling kind, but the type that stays with you long after you've met her, like a delicate watercolor painting. My mother never spoke loudly, never laughed too hard, but always had warm hugs and tender looks whenever I needed them. I remember her hands, slender fingers with neatly trimmed nails, and the faint scent of lavender lotion whenever she stroked my hair. "My dearest Liam," Mom would often say to me each night before bed. "You are my most precious gift. You know that." And I believed it blindly. The way every child believes in the love of those who birthed and raised them. My grandmother, Dorothy Parker, was an entirely different character. She was a tall, thin, straight-backed woman with silver hair always pulled into a bun so tight it almost stretched the skin around her eyes. She rarely smiled, and when she did, it felt more like a concession than an expression of joy. Grandma always dressed as if she were preparing for a formal afternoon tea, dresses that fell below the knee, matching jackets, a pearl brooch, and immaculate white gloves. One could say she was the epitome of the Old South aristocracy, proud, stern, and perpetually concerned with propriety and appearances. A Parker must never forget his place in society, she often told me. We have a responsibility to uphold the family honor. The blood that flows in our veins is the result of generations of careful selection. I grew up with these lectures about lineage, about proper conduct, about the importance of maintaining the family image. Why did a child need to know such things? Why did a 10-year-old boy have to worry about bloodlines and family honor? Looking back now, I see the painful irony in every word my grandmother spoke. 2. The first cracks. The relationship between my mother and grandmother always had a strange tension that I couldn't understand as a child. It wasn't open disagreement, but something more subtle. Quick glances exchanged when they thought I wasn't looking, hushed conversations behind closed doors, and sometimes a heavy silence between them that would last for a week. I remember once, when I was 12, I accidentally overheard a snippet of their conversation. I was on the stairs, heading down to the kitchen for a snack, when I heard Grandma's voice from the living room. "Don't you forget, Nancy, that if it weren't for me, you would never have had the boy." Grandma's voice was cold. "Mother, you don't need to remind me of that every time we disagree on how to raise him," my mother replied, her voice trembling. "No, I think I do need to remind you, because you seem to be forgetting your place, and the boy's place." A long silence, then my mother's voice, smaller. "I never forget, Mother. How could I? But Liam is my son. I love him." A dry laugh from Grandma. "Love? Didn't we agree from the beginning not to let emotions cloud our judgment? We did what needed to be done. And now, we continue to do what needs to be done. No more. No less. I stood there, frozen, not understanding what they were talking about. Loving me? Why was that an issue? I was Mom's son, Grandma's grandchild. Of course, they loved me, right? And what was my place? I crept back to my room, feeling that something was wrong but unable to grasp it. That night, when Mom came into my room to wish me good night, I looked at her longer than usual, searching her pale blue eyes for a sign, a hint about the conversation I'd overheard. She smiled at me, stroked my hair as always, but there was something different. A sadness, an anxiety I couldn't name. And I didn't ask. One of the decisions I regret most in my life. Growing up in Savannah, I became part of a seemingly perfect community. I attended the Savannah Arts Academy, where I excelled in writing and playing the piano. I had a close group of friends, Alex with his passion for photography, Maya with her amazing opera voice, and Thomas with his impressive collection of old books. We often gathered at Forsyth Park on weekend afternoons, lounging on the grass under the shade of the oak trees, discussing books, music, and our dreams for the future. What do you think you'll do after graduation, Liam? Maya asked me one such afternoon, during our senior year. Columbia, I replied, without hesitation. Literature. Grandma has already arranged everything. She has connections with the admissions board. Alex looked at me strangely. Do you ever think about deciding for yourself? I mean, is literature really your passion, or just what your grandma wants? The question made me inexplicably uncomfortable. I didn't have an answer. I had never thought I could want anything other than what had been planned for me. Was literature my passion? Or was I just good at it because that's what Grandma expected? Those were the first cracks in the perfect picture of my life. Small questions, gentle doubts, strange gaps in my understanding of myself and my family. But I ignored them, as people often do with small cracks in the familiar walls of their homes, until that wall came crashing down completely. My grandmother died on a rainy March morning. A mild stroke while she was sleeping. No pain, the doctor said. A peaceful end for a woman who had lived 83 years with such strict control. The news reached us via a call from the housekeeper at dawn. I heard the phone ring, then my mother's hushed voice in the hallway. I opened my door, wearing wrinkled pajamas, my hair a mess, and saw Mom standing there, phone in hand, her gaze distant. Mom, she wasn't crying. There was no sadness on her face. Instead, I saw relief. Just for a split second, before she managed to cover it with a more serious expression. Your grandmother has passed. Liam, she said, her voice oddly gentle. She passed away in her sleep last night. I stood there, feeling numb. Not from the pain of loss. My relationship with Grandma had always been distant. Too formal to be called close, but because of my mother's reaction. The complete absence of tears. The lack of grief on the face of someone who had just lost her mother-in-law. My mother put the phone down, sighed deeply, and said, I'm going to get ready and go to her house. Do you want to come with me? Yes, I replied automatically. I'll get dressed. As I turned back to my room, I heard a strange sound from behind, a choked sob. I turned back and saw my mother, her shoulders shaking, her hand covering her mouth. But when she looked up and met my eyes, I realized those weren't tears of sadness. It was a different kind of crying, a release, as if an invisible burden had been lifted from her shoulders. She quickly wiped her eyes, gave me a weak smile, and disappeared into her room. 3 hours later, we were at my grandmother's house. Neighbors, friends of hers, and a few distant family members had gathered, bringing homemade dishes and soft words of condolence. I sat silently in the living room, watching people come and go. Listening to stories about Grandma I'd never known, about her youth, her career on Savannah's Historic Preservation Board, the years before I was born. Dorothy was always a strong woman. An old friend of Grandma's said in a respectful tone. She overcame so many challenges. Nancy's inability to have children nearly destroyed her, but Dorothy found a solution. She always found a solution. I froze. Nancy couldn't have children? My mother couldn't have children? But I was. My mind reeled, trying to understand the meaning of the words I just heard. When the woman realized I was sitting nearby, her face suddenly changed color. Oh, Liam. I didn't see you there. I didn't mean. It's okay, I said, my voice strangely calm. You must be mistaken. But I knew she wasn't. Another piece had just been added to the strange puzzle I hadn't realized I was trying to solve. A few hours later, when most of the guests had left, and my mother was busy with the funeral director downstairs, I slipped into my grandmother's room. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Perhaps an explanation, a clue. Something to soothe the persistent headache and the growing sense of unease within me. Grandma's room was exactly as it had been when she was alive, neat to the point of being almost sterile. Not a single item out of place. The pearl-colored bedspread was pulled taut without a wrinkle, the books arranged neatly by height on the shelves. The family photos placed precisely, including a picture of me as a newborn, set on the bedside table. I picked up the photo, looking at my tiny face wrapped in a blue blanket. There was something strange about this picture. I'd seen it 1,000 times, but now, after what I just heard, I looked at it with different eyes. My mother in the photo looked, not like someone who had just given birth. There was none of the exhaustion I usually saw on the faces of new mothers in my friends' baby photos. Instead, her face radiated pure happiness, but without any sign of physical depletion. I put the photo down and continued searching, unsure of what I was looking for. I opened a drawer of the bedside table, finding only an old Bible and a few pills inside. I checked under the bed, nothing but a pair of slippers and a box of spare blankets. I opened her wardrobe, rummaging through the carefully hung clothes and neatly folded scarves. And then, behind a pile of winter coats, I saw a small cabinet built into the wall, something I had never noticed before. It was locked, but the key was taped to the back. My heart pounded as I unlocked it and pulled the small door open. Inside was a chaotic mess of papers, old bills, letters, and photographs, a complete contrast to the neatness outside. And lying right on top was a pale brown envelope, carefully sealed, with handwritten words, "Liam, to be opened only upon my death." My hand trembled as I picked up the envelope. It was heavy, containing many things inside. I looked around the room, half expecting Grandma to walk in and catch me invading her privacy. But only the heavy silence of death filled the room. I tore open the envelope. Inside was a diverse collection of documents, a copy of my birth certificate, which I thought was nothing unusual. Another birth certificate. This was unusual. A series of receipts for large cash payments, a handwritten contract between my grandmother and someone named Dr. Richard Caldwell from a place called Riverside Private Clinic, and a photograph torn in half. I picked up the two birth certificates, placing them side by side. The first one, the one I had seen before, listed my name as Liam Parker, born on April 15, 2001, at Memorial Savannah Hospital, son of Nancy and Jonathan Parker, who I was told had died when I was little. The second certificate, older, more worn, listed a different name, William Morris, born on the same day, but at a place called Riverside Private Clinic in a small town near Atlanta, son of Elena Morris, 16 years old, father unknown. I felt as if someone had just punched me in the stomach. The air seemed to be sucked out of my lungs. I couldn't breathe. William Morris, Elena Morris, unfamiliar names that somehow caused a sharp pain in my heart. I picked up the torn photograph, trying to piece it together. One half was the face of Nancy, the woman I had called Mom for 17 years. The other half was a young woman, perhaps just out of her teens, with large blue-gray eyes exactly like mine, a feature I had never seen in Nancy or anyone in the Parker family. The eyes of Elena Morris, the eyes of my biological mother. I read the contract, and each line felt like a knife stabbing into my heart. It was a sales agreement, an agreement where Dorothy Parker had paid a large sum of money to Dr. Caldwell to arrange the transfer of me from Elena Morris to Nancy Parker. There were clauses about secrecy, about never making contact, and about the money paid for Elena's medical expenses and support. I had been bought. I wasn't Liam Parker. I was William Morris. And the woman I had called Mom my whole life was not my biological mother. A noise at the door startled me. I looked up, tears streaming down my face, and saw Nancy, or whatever I was supposed to call her now, standing there, her face as white as a sheet. "Liam," she whispered, looking at the papers scattered around me. "Oh, Liam, you shouldn't have found out like this." "Found out what?" I stood up, my voice trembling with anger and pain. That my whole life is a lie? That I was bought like a piece of merchandise? That my real name isn't even Liam? "Sometimes, the truth isn't what people need," she replied, stepping into the room and closing the door. "Sometimes, the truth only causes unnecessary pain." "Unnecessary?" I almost shouted, feeling anger surge through me. "You dare tell me that knowing who I am is unnecessary?" "You know who you are," she said, her voice pleading. "You are Liam Parker, my son, the one I've loved and raised for 17 years. The one I taught to read, held when you cried, cared for when you were sick. If that's not a mother, then what am I?" "A liar," I replied, the words like acid on my tongue. "Someone who bought a child with money and built his entire life on lies." Nancy recoiled as if I had slapped her. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I no longer felt moved. I was past that point. I felt numb, empty, as if a part of me had died in this room. "I need to get out of here," I said, stuffing all the papers into my bag. "I can't be here. I can't look at you right now." "Liam, please," she reached for my arm, but I pulled away. "Let me explain. There's more to it." "I don't want to hear it," I said, walking past her and heading for the door. "I can't." I ran out of that house, ignoring Nancy's calls behind me. I ran through the sun-drenched streets of Savannah, sweat and tears mingling on my face. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs ached. Then I collapsed onto a bench in Forsyth Park, panting and trembling. I took out my phone and called the only person I could think of, Alex, my best friend. "I need a place to stay," I said as soon as he picked up, my voice cracking. "Just for a few days. I can't go home. I'll explain later." "Okay," Alex replied, without asking any further questions. That's what I always cherished about him, his ability to know when to ask and when to stay silent. "Come over. My parents are in Florida. It's just me at home." That night, lying on the spare bed in Alex's room, I told him everything. He listened in silence, only occasionally nodding or swearing softly when I got to the worst parts. "What are you going to do?" he asked, when I finally fell silent. "I don't know," I admitted, staring at the ceiling. "But I know I need to find her. Elena Morris. I need to know the truth, the whole truth. Not Dorothy's version. Not Nancy's version. The real truth. For the search. I stayed at Alex's for 3 days. 3 days to process everything I discovered. 3 days to plan my next move. My phone buzzed constantly with calls and texts from Nancy, but I didn't answer. I couldn't. Every time I saw her name on the screen, I felt a pang in my heart, a mixture of betrayal, anger, and, worst of all, longing. Because regardless of the truth, Nancy was still the woman who had raised me, the one who read me stories every night, who put band-aids on my knees when I fell, who taught me how to tie a tie and lace my shoes. On the fourth day, I decided it was time to act. I couldn't hide forever, and I couldn't solve anything by lying in Alex's room, staring at the ceiling and wondering why my life had taken such a bizarre turn. The first thing I did was a DNA test. I ordered a kit online, paid extra for expedited processing, and sent off my saliva sample. I needed scientific confirmation, irrefutable proof that I was not the biological son of Nancy and Jonathan Parker. Next, I started searching for information about Elena Morris. That was a much harder task. I didn't have much information about her, only her name, her age when she had me 16, and the name of the clinic where I was born. I spent hours in the library and online, scouring local news archives, public records, and social media. There are too many Elena Morrises. I signed to Alex after an unproductive afternoon, and none of them seemed to fit. What about the clinic? He suggested. Riverside Clinic, right? You could start there. It was a good idea. I searched for Riverside Private Clinic near Atlanta, but nothing came up. Either it had closed, or changed its name, or never officially existed. A thought that worried me. I went through the papers from Grandma's envelope again, looking for clues. The doctor's name, Richard Caldwell, appeared on the contract. I looked him up and discovered he had died 5 years ago. A small article about his death mentioned he had once been the medical director of a facility called St. Helena Mental Health Center, a completely different name from Riverside Private Clinic. St. Helena. I searched for that name and found a facility still in operation in a small town about 2 hours' drive from Atlanta. Its website described it as a long-term care facility for individuals with mental health issues. A psychiatric hospital, not a maternity clinic. A sick feeling settled in my stomach as the pieces began to fit together. A 16-year-old girl, a mental institution. A baby who disappeared. The story forming in my head was far crueler than anything I had imagined. I need to go there, I told Alex. I need to go to St. Helena. Alex looked at me for a long moment, worry lines creasing his brow. Are you sure? You don't know what you'll find there. Exactly, I replied. That's why I have to go. 2 days later, I was on a Greyhound bus heading toward North Georgia. Alex had wanted to come with me, but I refused. This was my journey, something I needed to face alone. I had all the papers from Grandma's envelope, some savings, and my phone, still off to avoid calls from Nancy. The town where St. Helena was located was a tiny place called Millbrook, one of those small towns on the Georgia map that most people just pass through on their way somewhere else. It had a main street with a handful of small shops, an old county courthouse, and a diner that looked like it hadn't changed since the 1950s. But what caught my attention was the hill to the east of town, where a large, red brick building stood imposingly, St. Helena Mental Health Center. I rented a room at a small motel near Main Street, dropped off my things, and walked to the institution. My heart hammered in my chest. I didn't have a specific plan of approach. How could I just walk into a medical facility and ask about a patient who might have been there 17 years ago? I wasn't sure if Elena was still there. But if this was where I was born, surely someone had to know something. When I reached the main entrance, I realized I needed a convincing story. I decided simplest was best. I would say I was a student doing a research project on the history of mental health care facilities in Georgia. The woman at the reception desk, a middle-aged woman with dyed blonde hair and reading glasses, looked at me skeptically when I presented my story. We don't usually have students coming in for research, she said. Do you have a letter of introduction or authorization from your school? No, I admitted, trying to muster a confident smile. This project is a personal initiative. I'm particularly interested in the history of St. Helena because I had a relative who worked here many years ago, Dr. Richard Caldwell. Her eyes widened. Dr. Caldwell? He was family of yours. He was a family acquaintance, I said, my voice trembling slightly. And I'm trying to learn more about his work here, especially around 2001. She looked at me intently, as if trying to decide whether to believe me. Then she sighed. We can't share information about patients or the facility's operations, she said. But if you want to talk to someone about the general history of St. Helena, I could introduce you to Mrs. Meredith. She's our head nurse and has worked here for nearly 40 years. That would be wonderful, I said, trying to hide my excitement. I'd be very grateful. She made an internal call, exchanged a few words, then nodded at me. Mrs. Meredith will see you in the break room in 5 minutes. Down this hall, turn right at the intersection. The break room is on the left. As I walked away, I felt her eyes still on me. I wondered if she recognized something about me, about my face, perhaps. Maybe I looked so much like Elena that she felt something familiar. Mrs. Meredith turned out to be a petite woman, in her late 60s, with short silver hair and a warm smile. She invited me to sit at a table in the empty break room and placed a cup of coffee in front of me. So she said, looking at me intently, Jesse said you're researching St. Helena and are particularly interested in Dr. Caldwell? I swallowed hard. It was time to take a risk. I couldn't keep up my false story forever, and this might be my only chance. Actually, I said, my voice trembling, I'm looking for information about a patient who might have been here in 2001. Her name was Elena Morris. She would have been about 16 at the time. Mrs. Meredith's expression shifted from friendly to wary. You know we can't share patient information. That violates confidentiality regulations. I know, I said, taking the folder of papers from my backpack. But this is a special case. Elena Morris is my biological mother. She stared at me, saying nothing. I just found out, I continued, spreading the documents out in front of her. I was born here, or at least at a place called Riverside Private Clinic, run by Dr. Caldwell. But I think that was just a front. I think Elena Morris was brought here because she was pregnant, and then her child, me, was taken away and sold to a family in Savannah. Mrs. Meredith picked up the documents, examining them with an unreadable expression. She looked through the birth certificates, the contract, and paused when she saw the torn photo of Elena. Then I saw it, a flicker in her eyes, a small sign of recognition. You knew her, I blurted out. You knew Elena Morris. Mrs. Meredith sighed, placed the documents down, and looked directly into my eyes. Those eyes, she said softly. I thought there was something familiar when I saw you. You have her eyes. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would leap out of my chest. Can you tell me about her? Is she still here? Mrs. Meredith glanced around the room, as if to make sure we were still alone. You know, I should report this. This is a serious ethical and legal breach. But I've been here long enough to see terrible things happen under the guise of best care, and I think it's time some truths came to light. She picked up Elena's photo. Elena is still here. It's been 17 years, but she's still here. She was diagnosed with schizophrenia and delusional disorder, but I always doubted that diagnosis. She was brought here pregnant, an orphan from the foster care system. No one to protect her, no one to ask questions. My grandmother, I said, feeling nauseous. Dorothy Parker. Did she arrange everything? Mrs. Meredith nodded sadly. Mrs. Parker was one of this facility's major donors. She and Dr. Caldwell had an arrangement. This wasn't the first time, I suspect. Though I have no proof of other cases. What happened? I whispered, not sure if I really wanted to know the answer. Elena gave birth to you here, in a separate wing Caldwell called Riverside Clinic. But right after you were born, you were taken away. Elena was told you had died at birth. She never believed it. She kept insisting she'd heard you cry, that she knew you were alive. That's why they kept her here. She was considered delusional about her lost child. I felt as if someone had just punched me in the chest. I couldn't breathe. Tears streamed down my face uncontrollably. She's been locked up here, I said, my voice breaking, for 17 years. Because she knew the truth? Because she knew her child was alive. Mrs. Meredith nodded, her own eyes moist with tears. I tried to help her in my own way. I tried reporting Caldwell a few times. But he had too many connections, and I had no concrete evidence. When he died, I hoped to help Elena get discharged. But by then, her file was so thick, and no one believed she could live on the outside. I need to see her, I said, standing up. Please, can you help me see her? Mrs. Meredith looked at me for a long moment, as if weighing an important decision. Then she stood up. Follow me, she said. But remember, Elena has been through a lot. She might not be what you expect. As we walked through the corridors of St. Helena, I felt my heart beat faster and faster. This was where I was born, and somewhere in this large, gloomy building was the woman who had given birth to me, the woman whose son had been stolen from her, the woman who had been locked away for speaking the truth. Elena, my biological mother. Mrs. Meredith led me through a series of corridors, deeper and deeper into the building. We reached an area called D-Wing, a section designed for long-term patients. The scent of disinfectant couldn't mask the faint, underlying odor of medication and deeply buried despair. This was not a place of healing. This was a place where people were sent when society didn't know what else to do with them. Room 423, Mrs. Meredith said, stopping before a door. Elena likes to look out the window. She requested a room with a window right from the start, and it was one of the few requests that were met. She looked into my eyes. I'll give you an hour, not a second more. And officially, this never happened. I never brought you here, and you never met me. Understand? I nodded, feeling a tremor run through my body. I understand. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart. Don't thank me, she replied. Do the right thing. That's all I ask. She knocked lightly on the door, then opened it. Elena, you have a visitor today. The room was small and simple, but cleaner and brighter than I had expected. A single bed with a light blue spread, a small dresser, a table with 2 chairs, and a small bookshelf filled with old books. On the walls were drawings, simple landscapes, done in colored pencil and watercolor. And sitting by the window, looking out at the garden below, was a small woman with long, gray-streaked brown hair. She turned when she heard the door open, and it took all my strength not to cry out. The eyes, those large, blue-gray eyes, were my eyes. The same shape. The same unique color. The same curious gaze. Looking into her eyes was like looking into a mirror. Elena, Mrs. Meredith said gently, this is a special visitor who wanted to see you. I'll be back in an hour. And with an encouraging nod to me, she left, closing the door behind her. We looked at each other in silence. I didn't know what to say, what to do. How do you introduce yourself to the person who gave birth to you, who believed you were dead, who had spent her life mourning you? Elena tilted her head to one side, studying me with quiet curiosity. She didn't look crazy. She didn't look unstable. She just looked tired and sad, with deep lines etched around her eyes and mouth, the marks of too many years of suffering. "I know who you are," she finally said, her voice hoarse from disuse but still gentle. "I've been waiting for you." "You knew?" I whispered, stepping forward uncertainly. Elena nodded, a small smile gracing her lips. "A mother knows her child will find her someday, William. Or whatever name they call you now." "Liam," I said, my voice trembling. "They call me Liam." "Liam," she repeated, as if tasting the name. A beautiful name, close to the one I chose. I couldn't hold back any longer. I rushed forward and knelt beside her, tears flowing uncontrollably. I didn't know if I should hug her. She might not be comfortable with touch after all she'd been through, but Elena decided for me. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and touched my face, wiping away my tears with a tenderness no words could describe. "You're so beautiful," she whispered. "I dreamed of your face, but reality is so much more beautiful." "Mom," I said, calling her that for the first time, and it felt right, strangely real. "Mom, they said you were crazy. They said you imagined me. But you were right. You were always right. I'm alive. I'm here." Elena laughed, a soft sound mingled with a sob. "Of course I was right. A mother knows when her child is alive. I heard you cry. I knew." She reached out and hugged me. And I let myself melt into this woman's embrace, this stranger who felt so strangely familiar. We cried together, tears of 17 lost years. When we finally separated, Elena looked directly into my eyes. "How did you find me? How did you know?" And so I told her everything. About Dorothy's death, the envelope I found, the discovery that Nancy wasn't my biological mother, and my journey to St. Helena. She listened intently, nodding occasionally, but not interrupting me. When I finished my story, she sighed deeply. "Dorothy Parker," she said, her voice suddenly hardening. "I'll never forget that name. She visited me once, you know, after you were taken. She wanted to make sure I could never find you." "Can you tell me?" I asked gently. "About you? And about what happened?" Elena looked out the window for a long moment, as if gathering long-buried memories. "I was an orphan," she finally said. "I never knew who my biological parents were. I grew up in foster homes and group homes, 13 different houses before I was 16. My last foster family, the Morrises, where I got my last name, had a son, a few years older than me. He forced himself on me. I got pregnant. When the Morrises found out, they kicked me out. I had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. And then Dr. Caldwell appeared, with an offer to help me at his facility. St. Helena, I whispered. "Yes," she said, but they called it Riverside Clinic when they talked to me. A place where young mothers could give birth in privacy and dignity. It was a lie. This was where they hid girls like me, unwanted girls, girls whose pregnancies caused shame or inconvenience. I was here throughout my pregnancy. They fed me and gave me a place to sleep, but I wasn't allowed to leave. I was told that after the birth, I would be helped to start a new life. I dreamed of working, earning money, and raising my child. I had chosen a name for you, William, after a grandfather I never met but had heard many stories about. She paused, a sad smile appearing. And then you were born. I only saw you for a second before they took you away. I remember you crying, a strong, angry cry, as if you were protesting being taken from me. And then there was an injection, and when I woke up, they told me you had died. But you didn't believe them, I said, gripping her hand. I didn't believe them, she confirmed. I heard you cry. I felt you. And I saw them, Dr. Caldwell and a tall, stern woman I later learned was Dorothy Parker, walking out with a small bundle. I screamed. I fought. I tried to chase them. And that's when they sedated me for the first time, the medication they would continue to use for years. I felt as if a knife had just been twisted in my heart. The pain on her face as she recounted these memories was unbearable. How long have you been here? 17 years. Elena nodded. I tried to escape, 3 times in the first year. The last time, I made it all the way to Savannah. I didn't know that's where you were, but I had a strange feeling there, as if I was being led by an invisible thread. But they found me. They always found me. They can't keep you here anymore, I said, my voice trembling with anger. This is illegal. You're not crazy. You were never crazy. I know that, she said with a faint smile. And now you know too. But after so many years, the lies become real. I started to believe that maybe I did have a problem. Maybe the delusions they said I had were real. I started to doubt myself, to doubt my memories. That was the worst part, when they make you doubt your own sanity. I'm going to get you out of here, I said, determination surging within me. I swear it. I won't let you stay here another day. You don't understand, she said, shaking her head sadly. It's not that easy. I'm a legally committed psychiatric patient. I have no rights. I have no voice. And you're just a 17-year-old boy. I don't care, I said, squeezing her hand. I don't care how hard it is. I won't abandon you like everyone else did. I'll get our DNA and prove our relationship. I'll hire a lawyer. I'll take this story to the press if I have to. But I will get you out of here. And as I looked into her eyes, my exact eyes, I saw something she probably hadn't felt in 17 years. Hope. I left St. Helena with a fierce determination and a plan forming in my mind. I had promised Elena I would return, that I wouldn't abandon her. And I swore to myself this would be a promise I would keep until death. But first, I needed to confront Nancy, the woman I had called Mom my entire life. I sent her a brief text on the way back to Savannah. I'm coming home. We need to talk. Don't contact anyone else. I'll explain when I get there. When I walked into the Parker house on Abercorn Street, everything looked the same, but it felt completely different. The walls seemed to be lying. The family photos hanging on the walls seemed to mock me. Even the air smelled different, as if the familiar scent of my home was now tainted with the stench of deceit. Nancy was waiting for me in the living room, sitting upright on the sofa, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She looked older than when I had left just a few days before. New lines had appeared around her eyes, and her pale blonde hair seemed to have more silver strands. Or perhaps I was just now noticing them. Liam, she said as I walked in, her voice trembling. You're back. I'm not sure I should call this coming home, I replied, still standing in the doorway, unwilling to step further into the room. Home is where people don't build your life on lies. Nancy closed her eyes, as if enduring physical pain. Liam, please, let me explain. Explain, I said, trying to keep my voice calm even though my heart was pounding. Explain that you bought me? Explain that you knew my biological mother was alive and being held in a mental institution? Explain that my whole life is a lie? Nancy flinched. You found her, she whispered. Elena, you found her. Yes, I said, stepping into the room and sitting on the chair opposite her, keeping a distance between us. I met my biological mother, the woman whose son you and Dorothy took, and then had her locked up in a mental institution, accused of imagining my existence. Tears streamed down Nancy's cheeks. You don't understand, Liam. It wasn't like that. Then how was it? I asked, my voice rising. Explain it to me. Explain why I found a contract in Dorothy's things. A contract paying a doctor to take me from a young girl? Explain why Elena Morris has been locked up in St. Helena for the past 17 years. Nancy took a shaky breath. I couldn't have children, she said softly. I tried every treatment, every procedure, for years. Nothing worked. And Dorothy, my mother-in-law, she desperately wanted a grandchild. An heir. She was obsessed with continuing the Parker lineage. So you bought a child? I said, feeling anger rise. As if I were an item on a shelf. It wasn't like that, she protested, her voice pleading. Dorothy arranged everything. She knew Dr. Caldwell from the hospital board. She'd been a benefactor of St. Helena for years. She told me there was a young girl, an orphan, who was pregnant and couldn't keep the baby. That this would be a good solution for everyone. The girl would be helped, the baby would have a good home, and we would have a child. And that sounded reasonable to you? I asked, unable to hide the bitterness in my voice. Buying a child from a 16-year-old girl? Nancy looked down at her wringing hands. I told myself it wasn't buying. That it was a fee to cover medical expenses for her care. I lied to myself, Liam. I wanted a child so badly that I was willing to turn a blind eye to the questionable aspects. Questionable aspects. I repeated, unable to believe my ears. Is that what you call forcibly confining a woman in a mental institution? A questionable aspect? I didn't know. Nancy suddenly burst into tears, covering her face with her hands. I swear to God, Liam, I didn't know they would keep her there. Dorothy told me the girl had agreed to give up the baby. That she had signed papers, that she wanted to get on with her life. I never knew. But you didn't check, did you? I asked. You never wondered if she had really agreed? You never tried to find out what happened to her afterward? No, she admitted, her voice breaking. I didn't. I was too scared to ask, too scared to know. I just wanted to believe that everything was okay, that everyone had agreed, that no one was hurt. But people were hurt, I said softly. Elena was hurt. I was hurt. And you too, in a way. Because you lived with this lie, because you became an accomplice in this. Nancy looked up, her face wet with tears. I love you, Liam. That's not a lie. I've loved you from the first moment I held you in my arms. You were everything to me. I would do anything for you. Anything? I asked, a plan forming in my head. Then help me get Elena out of St. Helena. She froze. What? You heard me. I said, suddenly feeling stronger, more determined. If you really love me, if you really want to do anything for me, then help me get my biological mother out of the mental institution where you and Dorothy had her locked up. Liam, I don't know if I can. You built your entire life, my entire life, on a crime. I interrupted, my voice hardening. This is your chance to do the right thing, to make amends. You have money. You have connections. You know people on St. Helena's board. Use all of that to help me get Elena out of there. Nancy looked at me. Fear and sadness battling something else in her eyes. Perhaps remorse, or perhaps just the realization that this was her last chance to salvage a shred of her relationship with me. What would you do with her if we got her out? She asked softly. I'll take care of her, I said, without hesitation. Whatever it takes. She's my mother. The last words hung in the air between us. She's my mother, not you. Nancy closed her eyes, as if enduring a physical blow. All right, she finally said, her voice hoarse. I'll help you. You promise? I asked, not quite believing her. I promise, she said, looking directly into my eyes. I can't change the past, Liam. I can't change what happened, but I can try to make it right. In my own way. I nodded, feeling a small part of the anger in my heart subside. Not exactly forgiveness. I wasn't sure I could forgive Nancy for a long time. If ever, but at least an acknowledgement that she was trying to do the right thing now. There's one more thing I need, I said, standing up. Dorothy's diary. I know you have it. I need to see it. Nancy looked as if I had just asked her to jump off a cliff. Liam, I don't think that's a good idea. It's not a request, I interrupted. I need to know the whole truth. All of it. With a sigh of defeat, Nancy stood up and left the room. She returned a few minutes later with a small, leather-bound book in her hand. Here, she said, handing it to me reluctantly. But prepare yourself, Liam. She wasn't a pleasant person. What's written in there might hurt you. I'm past being hurt by the truth, I said, taking the diary. I just need to know it. I took the diary to my room, if I could still call it my room. I sat on my bed, feeling alien and uncomfortable in the space I had lived in my entire life. The pale blue walls, the bookshelves filled with classic literature Dorothy had insisted I read. The trophies from debate competitions she had pushed me into, they all felt like they belonged to someone else, a version of me that no longer existed. The diary felt heavy in my hands. It was bound in dark brown leather, with the initials DP embossed in gold on the cover. I opened it, my heart pounding, unsure if I was ready to face what I would find inside. But knowing I had no other choice. The first few pages were the ordinary jottings of an elderly woman, appointments, social events, thoughts on the weather, and the neighbors. But as I turned to the entries from the year 2000, the tone changed. Dorothy began to write about Nancy and her failure to conceive. June 20th, 2000, another failure. Nancy cried all day. I cannot abide her weakness. Jonathan would be so disappointed if he were alive. A wife who cannot bear children is an utter failure. The Parker line will die with me if I do not do something. I felt sick reading these words. The coldness, the utter lack of empathy for Nancy's pain. Jonathan, the father I was told had died in a car accident when I was little, had apparently passed away before I was even conceived. Another lie in a long series of lies. I continued reading, my heart pounding harder as Dorothy began to describe her plan. August 15th, 2000, I spoke with Richard today. He has a solution to our problem. One of his patients, a young girl, no family. No one to care, is with child. Richard says we can arrange a private adoption. For the right price, of course. No official paperwork, no troublesome questions. I have told Nancy about this. And she was hesitant at first, but she will do as I say. She always does. September 10th, 2000, I went to St. Helena today to see the girl. Elena Morris, a bland name for a bland creature. But she has one redeeming feature, lovely blue-gray eyes. That could be explained. Nancy has pale blue eyes, and Jonathan's were a darker blue. A child with blue-gray eyes would not arouse suspicion. The girl is a mess. Too young. I took the diary to my room, if I could still call it my room. I sat on my bed, feeling alien and uncomfortable in the space I had lived in my entire life. The pale blue walls, the bookshelves filled with classic literature Dorothy had insisted I read. The trophies from debate competitions she had pushed me into, they all felt like they belonged to someone else, a version of me that no longer existed. The diary felt heavy in my hands. It was bound in dark brown leather, with the initials DP embossed in gold on the cover. I opened it, my heart pounding, unsure if I was ready to face what I would find inside. But knowing I had no other choice. The first few pages were the ordinary jottings of an elderly woman, appointments, social events, thoughts on the weather and the neighbors. But as I turned to the entries from the year 2000, the tone changed. Dorothy began to write about Nancy and her failure to conceive. June 20th, 2000, another failure. Nancy cried all day. I cannot abide her weakness. Jonathan would be so disappointed if he were alive. A wife who cannot bear children is an utter failure. The Parker line will die with me if I do not do something. I felt sick reading these words. The coldness, the utter lack of empathy for Nancy's pain. Jonathan, the father I was told had died in a car accident when I was little, had apparently passed away before I was even conceived. Another lie in a long series of lies. I continued reading, my heart pounding harder as Dorothy began to describe her plan. August 15th, 2000, I spoke with Richard today. He has a solution to our problem. One of his patients, a young girl, no family. No one to care, is with child. Richard says we can arrange a private adoption. For the right price, of course. No official paperwork, no troublesome questions. I have told Nancy about this. And she was hesitant at first, but she will do as I say. She always does. September 10th, 2000, I went to St. Helena today to see the girl. Elena Morris, a bland name for a bland creature. But she has one redeeming feature, lovely blue-gray eyes. That could be explained. Nancy has pale blue eyes, and Jonathan's were a darker blue. A child with blue-gray eyes would not arouse suspicion. The girl is a mess, too young.